Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about the sequel to Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Surprise, surprise. We're going to be talking about the big G, grief, this whole episode. I know that's been kind of a heavy hitter topic this season and kind of throughout our podcast, but this one it's kind of hard to avoid because this whole movie is about grief. Different kinds of grief too, and also about the act of processing grief. So we're going to be talking about all that. Just a brief overview of the plot. This movie starts out with the death of T'Challa, R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman, because of his death in real life. They had to portray his death in the film, or they didn't portray it, which actually I thought was a good move.
Yeah.
Is having him die off screen felt respectful.
Yeah.
And we are seeing now a year after his death, as everyone in his life, his mother, Ramonda, Okoye, Shuri, Nakia, all of them as they're kind of actively processing or not processing still the year anniversary and the year that's happened of T'Challa's untimely, unpredictable death.
Which they chose to allow the audience to grieve much the same way.
Yeah.
They have to grieve the character that we had to grieve the actor, that the same story essentially played out on screen, which was, I think, a kindness that the director chose to give us, because much like T'Challa, Chadwick Boseman kept his illness secret. And only a few people knew, and then we only found out he had cancer and was terminal when it was too late. And they started out the movie right at that point, where you see Shuri's struggle with trying to use her skills to make something work. Because not only have they been grieving the loss and the illness of their king and brother and son, but also the loss of the Black Panther and the heart-shaped herb, that the sustainability of their culture is now gone.
Well, so much change has happened all at once. I mean, if you think about it, even of the course of like the Marvel movies, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yes.
Their first king has died. T'Challa's father. I can't remember his name.
King T'Chaka.
So they've had, in a very short amount of time, they've lost their king. They have lost
the first Black Panther.
Anonymity with the world. So there's also this process of almost like grieving their culture in a way, or their protectiveness. T'Challa, the 5-year blip, like he was part of that. I mean, that's kind of a collective trauma that happened that they do, I think, a good job in the Marvel Universe touching upon here and there. But he was a part of that too. So that also was 5 years that they don't really talk about, in which he was gone. There is so much that have happened in this community that is grief. And even I would say in Black Panther 2, like they basically had a civil war, you know, in there with Killmonger and that too. And like they kind of reference with Okoye that her husband seems to be imprisoned or in exile or something.
Yeah.
Because she says you can go visit him. And I'm sure it's because Daniel Kaluuya is like a huge actor and probably too busy for Marvel movies, right?
Probably.
Because he really blew up since that appearance. But I would say there is so much that is changed in a community that I bet just because of the secretiveness and the protectiveness of how they've guarded Wakanda for so long, probably stayed pretty secure. Like I bet you life was pretty stable.
Yes.
For a long time.
Yeah.
And then this past several years, maybe the past like 10 years within this country, it's been loss, change, grief, loss, change, you know, like over and over and over again until now, like probably within, like I said, they lost the original king, then they lost T'Challa to the blip, and then they get him back. And then he couldn't have been around for much longer before then he passes away forever.
Yeah.
And all this happens so quickly. And, you know, I don't really think about the fact that he was gone in the blip. They don't really touch upon that, obviously not, because that complicates the story
Yeah, it
a
does.
bit too much.
Yeah.
With a story that's already laden with the real life grief
Yeah.
of Chadwick Boseman. You know, I think you make a great point, Ben, which is that I think even as like a therapist watching this movie, it does a great job of letting there be space
Yes.
to be sad. You know how the opening credits, the Marvel sort of like where they do all the imagery of the comics, like the big Marvel,
The fanfare.
yeah, in the very beginning of the movie, how that's just dead silent.
Yeah.
And it's just pictures of Chadwick Boseman, pretty much. And when I saw this in theaters, you could hear a pin drop. Like it was dead silent.
Yeah, it
Besides,
was.
like you'd hear occasional like sniffles
Yeah.
of people crying. Like, and then later in the movie, at the very end, when Shuri's finally allowing herself to grieve, it's also dead quiet. And another time where the theater was dead quiet.
Yes.
And except for sniffles, my own sniffles. Too.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think what you're saying, Ben, is beautiful that this movie, it didn't Hollywoodize, glamorize his death. It really sunk into it in a way that felt respectful to Chadwick Boseman and to the other cast who had to be in active grief themselves while filming this.
Yeah.
I'm sure there wasn't a lot of acting happening.
Well, and the fans and the entire cultural icon that the man was,
Yeah.
having the movie parallel what happened in real life was a brilliant choice by Ryan Coogler and the writing team to allow everyone to access their real sadness for the loss of not only what he was, but what he was going to be. And I remember when I was standing in line to see Black Panther and seeing all of these people come out in African garb. And there were people standing in line saying like, wow, yeah, people talk about how black people don't come out to movies. Like, well, make a movie for us then. Make a movie about us.
Yeah.
For us, we'll come out. We'll wear our stuff. And, you know, it was really nice to see that. You know, again, it was obviously quite powerful for people to get to see an icon who is such a talented actor and portray all of their hopes and dreams that they would get to see somebody who looks like them, somebody who tells their story, somebody who tells a story about somebody with dark skin, somebody from Africa, in a way that doesn't need anything else to tie to it, that he is just the king and he is not flawed, he is not damaged, he is intelligent and strong and shining example of a human. And for Chadwick Boseman to have done that so well, the audience needed to grieve the loss of that, because that's a hard thing to find. That's a hard thing to find, and it took way too long for that to exist, and then the audience lost that with his death.
Yeah, I mean, the movie opening, even the way it did, it felt like it was like we just have to acknowledge
Yeah.
what has happened because we can't avoid it.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be macabre and weird and like almost like propping up his corpse.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, think the fact that they don't show him.
Yeah.
Like a wax version of him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you don't show like a CGI, like Paul Walker-esque,
Yeah.
you know,
Right, or
version of him.
What they did with Princess Leia, like, please don't.
Yeah. That one was a little trickier, but
Yeah.
to pull, I mean, just story wise, but I think this was done so respectfully and, like I said, allowing that space to breathe before then we get into the story. And I think jumping ahead a year was also smart in that I think what I also like with this movie, and as we're going to keep talking about it, is that it shows that a year later, it wasn't a way for the director and the story to be like, okay, we got that out of the way.
Yeah.
now we can get back to business. Now we're back in a Marvel movie, baby. Like, it's just like lights, camera, action. It was still heavy. Like, the whole movie was heavy. And it shows that even a year later, I mean, it's the anniversary. That's always poignant. We've talked on this podcast before about how you should always make sure if you're a therapist working with clients, to know the important anniversaries.
Yes.
So that you can check in with your clients. So a year anniversary of a death like this would be something you'd have to make sure as a therapist to keep your eye on.
Absolutely.
For your client. And we see how all these characters have been dealing with the grief differently. Because I think what we've talked about is T'Challa, the character, wasn't just a partner, a brother, a son. He was like a unifying position in his community.
Yeah.
So it's not even just how do we deal with our grief as an individual or as a family. We see like the collective grief that has gone on, especially in a situation where he's in this position of king, where so many parts of the community, like his sister and Okoye, feel like their job in a lot of ways with a king, right, is to keep him safe.
Yeah.
Is to protect him. Is to look out for him. And that not only is that our job, but that's what we're best at.
Yeah.
You know, there's something Shuri says in the movie that I thought was really true, and it reminded me of something someone would say in my office, which is that what's the point of me being able to do all this stuff, being so smart and so talented and have all these resources at my hands, if I couldn't have saved my brother?
Yeah.
Like, what does it matter? And I probably think similar to Okoye, you know, especially when she loses Shuri, then also in this movie.
Yeah.
It's that same thing of like, what does it matter? If I can do these things, if I can't fulfill my number one purpose, which is to keep my king safe. And then to keep his sister safe, the princess.
Yeah.
And like, so it's like, I think what this movie does well is it shows that grief sometimes isn't just grief. It's also like traumatic, you know, and not traumatic in the sense of, I think when we think of trauma and grief, we think of it like, oh, you must have saw him die in front of you, or like it must have been like a horrible death, like a car accident or something really violent. But like it can also be in this way too, where just the loss of someone can have a trauma effect on you. You might necessarily not get diagnosed with PTSD, you know, but it seeps into you in the way that trauma can seep into you.
Well, watching someone die is traumatic.
True.
It's inherently traumatic. It meets the criteria for PTSD by itself. Watching someone die from, just assume it's cancer or any other disease, whether it's sudden or prolonged, either way, you get the opportunity to meet the criteria for PTSD, unfortunately, because it's actual or threatened death or bodily harm. And a terminal illness meets that criteria, but people don't often allow themselves to even look at it that way. And it takes a skilled practitioner many years to understand that someone is being tortured, watching their loved one be tortured. And for someone like Shuri, there is no doubt she is dissociating away from that. They show us that right at the beginning, that Shuri has been dissociating away from feeling anything or doing any of the pre-grieving, acknowledging that her brother's death is likely and putting herself in a position where she's entertaining what ultimately is proven false reality, that she can do something about it. If she had just been better, she could have fixed him. And that becomes the driving force that dictates where Shuri's emotional growth and journey has to go throughout this whole film. Because one of the things that's so important to understand about trauma, and I'm going to go into sort of the EMDR way of looking at it here, but I think it's one of the better ones, even though there's lots of ways to look at it. One is not necessarily better than the other. Clients need what they need, not what one methodology says. But looking at it from an EMDR standpoint, you look at what are the images, what are the body sensations, and clients love to skip over that one. What are the emotions? What is the negative thought? Because the way the trauma encodes is going to be stuck with all of those. So when we look at someone like Shuri, we don't know what she might report as the worst images. It could have been watching her brother wither away and seeing him get sick and go from someone who is so strong to someone who's withered away. It could have been the moment where she's informed that he's gone. It could be watching the machine light up red, red, red over and over again. But this film doesn't show us the flashbacks to where she gets stuck, much like clients might report to us later. But what it does tell us over and over again is we see her racking her body and then numbing out throughout much of the film to not feel anything at all except anger and guilt, because she is beating herself up that she couldn't save him. The negative thought that persists in her mind, that is racked with shame, that doesn't allow her to process her grief until her mother does her the great kindness she does and takes her out into the wilderness and it's like, you're grieving now. He's gone. It was my fault. She doesn't allow herself to grieve until she verbalizes it's my fault, and then slowly starts to accept it because of the journey her mother and her go on. But the thing that's really important to understand with looking at PTSD is there is almost always some kind of blocking belief that keeps people stuck. And in this movie is such a prime example of it. It's my fault my brother is gone. I wasn't good enough.
Yeah, which honestly, I think if she was in my office, I would have to validate for her that it makes sense why she felt that way.
Absolutely.
She's like, if you think about even Infinity War, I think is what I'm thinking of. Like, if she'd been given enough time, it seems like she would have been able to crack the code of vision, right?
Yeah.
So she is someone that is smarter than everybody else in the room. She's smarter than Tony Stark. Like, she's the smartest person. Maybe not this new character Riri that they introduced, but you know, that she is the smartest person. And so this probably is the first time that she hasn't been able to do something about the situation, right? That's in front of her.
Yeah,
because the thing with her father was countries away, continents away.
Yeah.
And an explosion. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing she could have done.
No, absolutely not.
You know?
Nothing.
But this is probably the first time that a challenge has been presented to her, you know, or she's taken it on.
Yeah.
And she couldn't do anything about it. I always read it, I mean, because they don't give a lot of detail into what happened to him, which I think is correct to do.
Yes.
And I always got the impression, this might just be making up like headcanon, that he died pretty suddenly. That maybe like he was fine, and then maybe one day he just collapsed and was really sick, and then he was gone. Just because it seems like he kept it so secret, and it was so... There seemed like to be a suddenness to it. Maybe I was just reading into like the frenetic energy of the opening scene.
No, I feel like that's accurate.
But I always got the impression... Yeah, go ahead, Hannah.
Well, especially because we hear... Shuri says that he didn't tell me until it was too late. So she didn't know, they didn't know that he was sick. The same way that the audience didn't know that Chadwick Boseman had cancer.
But yeah, so I think with Shuri, I'd have to really tell her, like, it makes sense that you feel responsible, because this is, like, even from like an identity standpoint.
Yes.
This is the first challenge that you haven't accomplished or overcome, and it's the most important one that you've ever had.
Yeah.
It's vital to recognize that that's part of it when you're treating this, and we'll obviously be covering that later. But looking at how important it is to recognize the depth to which people assign themselves responsibility and how difficult it is for them to escape from the reality they constructed out of their own expectation. It is quite irrelevant that it wasn't possible until she can feel that tension from the moment that didn't get to do what she activated it to do, until that can leave her body. So I'm not going to get too deep into it because it's an idea I've been only formulating in my head here.
You stole my catch line.
Sort of. No, right? You see that like mark of like, hold on, motherfucker, that's my So Brittany has to, you said Batman last time first, so, just for...
Things are changing.
Things are changing. But what's important to understand with the people that are in places like Shuri is, and she's clearly the most in pain in this movie. Everyone's in pain, but Shuri's stuck.
She's the least resolved about it. Like, she's done the least processing
Yeah, the least
of
processing.
it. She's being the most avoidant. Too.
But she's being avoidant because of what shame is doing to deactivate her ability to grieve. Shame deactivates arousal states, but you need an arousal state to process a situation. Emotion is an activation of our arousal state to encode our memory with enough information to make an experience relevant to our survival. Most of our experiences in our life are entirely irrelevant, and we don't remember them. You don't remember trips to the grocery store. You don't remember what you heard on the radio 3 weeks ago. You don't remember every drive to work. You're accessing a general pool of memories, and you're pulling up one of 1,000 times you did those things, unless something specific happened. But if you went to the grocery store and somebody cut you in line, well, guess what? You had a feeling about them cutting you in line, and now it's relevant because there's a threat presented to you, and you're going to remember that one. But when you have somebody like Shuri having shame blocking her from dealing with that emotional activation, she stays stuck. The part of her she created to be the smartest person in the room, to shut down all of the noise of no matter what's going on, which we have seen her do. Wakanda is literally under attack, and she is in her lab building weapons and programming things and managing these computer things when death is at her door. But she's
probably like 16 when all this story started.
I don't know how old she is, but she's found this place inside her head where she can shut it all out. And she tries to do that to save her brother, and she couldn't.
Yeah.
But the problem is that part exists specifically to solve those problems, and it didn't get to complete its mission. So the loop that it's created is still active. It did not close. And working on this idea of like recognizing when a part is active, it needs to complete its mission or close the loop. And if it doesn't close the loop, the part stays active, stuck in the state it was created in. And it stays stuck there for a long time until either the person who is grieving can bring the part into the present experience where it's not needed and then it releases, or it gets the corrective experiences we've been talking about since this has been such a theme of our season. And it's so important to understand when you see somebody so stuck like that. Yes, we want to acknowledge their pain. Yes, we want to acknowledge that this must have been so incredibly difficult and impossible for you to feel that when you've done so much under such difficult circumstances that you couldn't do it this time.
Yeah.
But it takes more than that, and I think that's where clinicians get so stuck, because our teaching on it is so sparse in early career that people don't get this level of detail into why do people grieve and not grieve? Why do they get stuck and not stuck? Why do they do things that everyone else can tell them till they're blue in the face is not their fault, but they won't let it go? This movie was done with brilliant emotional intelligence to that, and I think it's a cultural gem and a psychological gem because of it.
I mean, for me, I think it's interesting the juxtaposition of Ramonda, I think I'm saying her name right, Ramonda and Shuri, the different way that they've dealt with T'Challa's death. To me, it almost feels like when I work with clients and I'm explaining like wise mind, the difference between like our emotional mind and our logic mind, and how we, at least in like Western society, because I can't speak to other societies, I haven't been a part of them, there's so much reverence of your logic side and your pragmatic side. I assume it's because we are rooted in patriarchy and misogyny.
I know that's right.
Which is why like there is this reverence for being hyper logical.
Yeah.
And this like disdain almost from being like emotional or woo woo. Like woo, like even those kind of terms like getting real woo woo or getting real corny, like how we have to, and I do that to myself even like as a therapist, as a caveat when I tell people, I go, I'm gonna ask you to do something and it's gonna sound woo woo, so I need you to hang in there with me.
I do the same thing.
Because I know it's like I have to acknowledge that systemically almost.
Yeah.
And Ramonda seems like someone who has been able to dip into their emotional self and let their emotion self breathe.
Yeah.
And Shuri is someone, and I see people like her all the time because, like I said, I'm part of Western society, where they get stuck in their logic mind, or they get stuck in what they think is their logic mind, but it's really their emotion mind. And what I mean by that is trying to problem solve the situation they're in.
Yeah.
You know, I think her...
Or like, if I think about it enough, I'll come up with a resolution. I'll come up with the answer to something.
If I throw myself into work and make this accomplishment or that accomplishment, kind of what you were saying, but almost like if I play the loop enough where I do it right this time, I will stop feeling this way.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like the goal is to not have emotions and to really dive into the emotions. I think because we can be conditioned to be so logical minded, we also become avoidant and don't trust that we can tolerate our emotions.
Yeah.
And so, like, what Ramonda says with her grieving, the queen, is like, I went into the desert. I went and no distractions, no nothing, you know, just kind of focused on my body and the world around me and let myself feel.
Yeah.
And really gave into it. You know, and that helped her heal as much as she could heal, right?
Yeah.
And I think what she was trying to impress that upon to Shuri by taking her on that little, like you were saying, Ben, that little excursion by the water is, you know, trying to get Shuri to release. And of course, Shuri is pushing on that because she's also doing that thing people do that when I have in my office, which is like rejection of the woo-woo, to the extent of like even here where her mom's trying to get her to access like the ephemeral, you know, like the universe, spirituality, this idea that there's a plane after this one, you know, and letting that comfort her or trying to get that to comfort her. And Shuri's like, I don't believe in any of that stuff. That doesn't make sense to me. You know what I mean? Which is, I see people do that all the time, you know, this, and I think it is that it's this way that we act like logic is like the smart person's avenue, right?
Yeah.
When really it is also a way to hide behind, but hide from emotion.
Yeah.
Hide from these complicated feelings and experiences. But you can pretend that you're doing it because you're like above it all, or you're too smart to believe in the afterlife, or you're too smart to believe in like cosmic whatever.
Yeah.
Or even this idea that there's things bigger than you, because emotions are bigger than you. Death is bigger than you. Like there's a lot of things that are bigger than yourself that you can lean into that feeling without having to believe in like God.
Yeah.
If that's not your jam.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Spirituality is possible without a deity.
Yeah. Like when people
Absolutely.
do recovery work, like substance use recovery, which can be very God heavy, sometimes they'll be like, they'll take people to the shore and they'll say, look at the water, like the ocean, or the, you know, it's bigger than us. So it's just like, it's just surrendering to the idea that there are things that are bigger than you, that you can't overcome, that you can't problem solve your way out of.
Yeah.
You can't put your head down and work really hard. And that includes like death is bigger than that. Your grief is bigger than that. And in that moment, like it seemed like her mother was really trying to get Shuri there. But Shuri was so stuck in that rejection
Yes.
of those ideas and hiding behind the idea that she knows better. Which is, you know, like I said, a classic
and
deflection.
And hiding behind her intellect.
Yeah.
If she's the smartest person in the room all the time, like that's a part of what she's going to hide behind. Mm-hmm. And I also like the thing that you said about how we're afraid of the emotions, afraid of how big they are. There's so many times where when I work with people who go through grief or who are actively going through grief, and I talk to them about how it feels like you're not going to stop crying. And people are worried that they're not going to be able to stop crying, that there's not going to be an end, that the pain is so big and so deep that they're not going to be able to handle it. And I talk to them about how to, that you will stop crying.
Yeah, your body can't sustain it. I mean,
Your
if you
body
ever
can't
met a
sustain-
toddler,
Yeah.
they can only throw a tantrum for so long before they literally pass out.
Yeah.
Do not test the universe
your body-
in such ways. It is bigger than you.
Yeah.
Ben's saying that because we are recording in his home right now, where he has a 5-year-old
And is preparing
with a tenacious
for-
personality.
For another baby.
Very tenacious.
Yeah.
She is my child and my wife's child.
Yeah. But what I tell people is like, it's not, to feel that big is not literally sustainable. Our body will poop out.
Yeah,
Even just to
exactly.
like go to sleep for a little while.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I talk to people about, because I felt this way when I had depression when I was like 19 and wouldn't go to a therapist, ironically, because I was a psychology major. And it felt like I was at the edge of a big black hole. And if I looked at it and if I talked about it, if God forbid I went to a therapist, I'd fall into that hole and I'd never get out of it.
Yeah.
And now I know, because I've gotten older, I do this work, I've been to therapy for years, that you're not going to fall into that hole. And it's not a hole. And there's a bottom, even if there is one, and you'll be okay. And you won't, like you said, you won't cry forever. It feels like you're crying forever. It's like the anticipation.
Yeah, I think the anticipation
Makes it feel so big. It's like, sometimes when I talk to people about this kind of thing, I'm like, it's like there's a boogeyman that's haunting your house. It's like there's a closet in your house that you won't look in, but you hear something behind it. And because you never check, anything could be behind there. It's like Schrodinger's cat or whatever it's called.
No.
You know what I'm talking about, though?
Schrodinger's cat is the cat's alive and dead at the same time.
Well, just the idea that there's something behind there and you can't determine like what it is. But there's also like the cave, Plato's cave or whatever. But I'm probably mixing all these philosophical ideas. I don't give a shit. Don't email me about it. I don't want to know. Anyway.
While we're derailed temporarily here, let's take a break for a second. We'll take a break here. We'll come back and we'll reformulate this thought.
So what I sometimes tell people when they're not going to process something is like, it's like there's a room in your house that you won't open the door to. And you don't know what's behind it, so it grows and grows. It's like a boogeyman. And if you can just get up enough courage or trust in yourself to open the door and check out what's behind there, it probably won't be as bad as you think. And even if it's really bad back there, now you know what you're dealing with, and then you can actually start dealing with it. You know, we do so much of like walking around, not looking at things directly, not wanting to open the door. And it just keeps us in this perpetual state of kind of agony in a lot of ways. And that unfortunately is where Shuri's at.
Yeah.
You know, is that, like you were saying, I can't look at it and you can't make me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is another part we can talk about, which is that the way that her grief exhibits itself the most, other than avoidance, is irritability and anger.
Yeah.
She's really mad.
She is really mad. But looking at that idea, before we go on that train, is looking at the idea of, Hannah, you started hitting at the anticipation, the apprehensive expectation of how bad it's gonna be.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to hear more about that because I think our listeners need to hear more about that.
I feel like when I'm working with people who are grieving, that the fear of I'm not going to be able to stop crying, the fear of if I do this, it's going to be so hard, I'm not going to be able to do anything, I'm not going to be able to handle it. They're so worried about not being able to handle it. They're so worried about needing to ask for help. And I think in a lot of ways, it's the anticipation and the worry of what it's going to look like and what they're going to look like when they're actually feeling the feelings. And it's all the anticipation about what is it going to be like and what can it be like. And your brain spiraling about that. Spiraling about the different possibilities of what could happen. Like I'm gonna fall into the hole.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to get out of it. There's so much, that anticipation is so intense because it's so intense because our brain, especially after we've lost somebody who's so important to us, who has had such a big impact on our identity, to imagine what it's going to be like to truly feel the sadness and feel the grief and the loss of that person, it's scary. That's a scary thing. And I think that's a part of where people can really get stuck in that anticipation kind of in a cycle of, I will talk about all these different ways to manage your grief. And I'll talk about, you can do something where you're allowed to be sad for 20 minutes and you set a timer and you just cry for 20 minutes and that's the time that you have. Or you have times where you're journaling about it. You have times where you're looking at stuff. There's so many different rituals that we can have when it comes to grieving. And it's really, and in a lot of ways, people that I've worked with who have engaged in some kind of ritual activity, and that can be anything. That can be going to visit a gravesite. It can be writing about them. It can be talking about them with someone. It can really be anything.
Watch a movie that you guys like together that makes you think of them.
Yeah, like there's so many different ways to kind of honor someone's memory and honor the impact that they had in your life. And I think that the anticipation, I keep saying that word wrong. I don't know what's going on with my brain.
You're doing great.
That the anticipation of it is so scary. Because I think the true reality of being still alive when someone that you care about so much is not alive anymore is such a scary existence to have to be in the beginning.
Well, death is a trip in that it's so existential and surreal.
Yeah.
You know, like we can never really wrap our heads around it, like being there and gone. That's why people, even if it's like a slow death, like a sickness, people will still feel like it's so sudden.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it is that part. I mean, philosophers will argue that we'd go mad, we'd go crazy if we really could conceptualize death actively. Like that we have to keep it behind a door in our brain to keep on going through life. And also, I like what you were saying, because sometimes I'll have clients, I'll make the argument, it does work better when you do it in person, because I only see clients virtually, but in person this works too, is saying can we start in this office together?
Yes.
In session together. Can we take 5 minutes and just see if we can sit here together and breathe through this to really feel it? I'm here with you. And then we'd only answer for 5 minutes, and the rest of the session, we can bullshit. We can talk about
anything.
Movies. We can talk about books. We can be done with the session for the day if you want to take a nap.
Yeah.
If you want to go for a walk, we go for a walk together. I think a lot too with that anticipation part is if you can build rapport with the client.
Yes.
Too. Sometimes I'll pull this card on them, which is do you trust me? Or do you trust that I know what I'm doing?
Yeah.
It's a good one.
I've helped other people
Yes, absolutely.
deal with this, and they were able to do it. I wouldn't ask you to do something that I didn't think you could live through.
Absolutely.
Or at least for today.
Absolutely.
We can do, and I'm not going to rush you.
Right.
I think a sign of a green therapist, and I've had these moments too, is trying to attack something like this too hard, too quickly.
Yes.
Because you think you're not doing your job properly as a therapist if you're not attacking it and challenging and pushing your client. When in reality, you have to go slow with this kind of thing.
Yes, you absolutely do. I totally agree with that. You have to. I also think about the validation of their pain is so important. Now, when you're getting trained as a therapist, we're taught to reflect back what people say in one kind of way or another. And a part of that is to validate their thoughts and feelings and their experiences.
Yeah.
And when somebody is grieving, this is one of those times where I really kind of step back into that it sounds like this. It sounds like you're feeling this. It sounds like it feels like blah, blah, blah. And a part of that is because validating that it's okay, that it makes sense that somebody feels the way that they do, really, again, that's helping process. Mm-hmm. That's helping process their part in this, in this grieving process. And so, and I feel like, and I definitely start with clients in my office the same way that you described it, of saying, or of us say, well, would you like to talk about them? Mm-hmm. Tell me something about them. Tell me anything.
A story. Yeah.
Tell me a story.
It's so important.
Like you
tell me a story. And that's where, but I know exactly what you mean when you say, when a green therapist just tries to come up with solutions. Mm-hmm. Or doesn't spend enough time letting them just feel. This is such an important, grief is such an important thing to learn how to process, because we experience it so fucking often in so many different ways.
And it's pervasive.
Yes.
Invasive and omnipresent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There are no shortcuts in grief.
Yeah.
And people want them.
They want them so badly.
I mean, who wants to be in that pain? You know,
nobody does. Absolutely.
And I tell clients too, like, you have to surrender to it, because grief is like one of the most unpredictable experiences we can have emotionally. In that you can be fine, legit fine, and then you can be crying, then you can be laughing, then you can forget that they died. And that can feel, and then you can feel guilty that you forgot that they died.
Yeah.
Like, you just kind of have to let yourself, it is like one of the most, like, where your body and your emotional self is like actively processing it.
Yes.
Like, almost like, if you want to think of it, when I say processing, like going through a factory inside of you, trying to figure out like what to do with it.
Yeah.
So you're going to feel all these different feelings, and that's okay. And don't judge yourself by it too.
Yeah.
I think what does also feel so beautiful about this movie, and we might make some faux pas from a cultural standpoint. We're happy to be corrected on that if that feels appropriate for anyone listening. It does seem like they give more space in their culture of Wakanda for that processing. You know, like even like what her mother describes, I wouldn't be surprised if that was of some sort of ritual that's maybe common. Go out into nature and just kind of get back to yourself. What she's describing is also very grounding. Just focus on, don't worry about anything else. Just try to get food to drink, you know, water to drink, food to eat, place to sleep, like, and just listen to the nature, ground, right? Don't distract yourself. Don't be busy, which we love to do.
And I think what we see Shuri do is she's isolating herself. She is
not responding to Nakia. Nakia is calling her.
Nakia, who is, I think, one of the people who really gets her. Also the person who loved her brother. Like, the fact that she is avoiding everything. She's avoiding the people in her life, and she's avoiding processing it. And she's really just she's hyper focused on the technology. Whatever she's doing with it, it's brilliant. Whatever she's doing with it, it's awesome. She's really good at it. But that she is isolating herself in a very specific way.
And because it looks productive.
Yeah.
It arguably is productive in like the definition of the word. I mean, that's why people hide and work, you know?
Yeah.
Is that it looks like you're fine in a lot of ways too. Like, it's a way for Shuri to also maybe throw in her mom's face or Nakia's face. Like, I'm still inventing things. I'm still doing stuff.
I can still do my job.
Like, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Ooh, are we Midwestern? Are we Midwestern today?
But that's what she's saying, right?
Absolutely.
So and when her mom comes in like that year later and she's like, you know, it's the anniversary, she's like, yeah. You know, she's trying to show that she's fine.
Which I think a part of the ritual is you burn your
morning clothes.
Morning clothes.
Yeah.
You burn your morning clothes a year later.
Because I would say Shuri is the one that seems to be having the hardest time. I know she's the one we see the most, like we're most inside of her head.
Yeah.
But like M'Baku, Nakia, even Okoye in some ways, But I would also say, like, going back to what you just said, Hannah, is that they also seem like they're the most still in community.
Yeah.
They're still with other people. They're still doing things. I mean, that's what's so beautiful, like the Dora Milaje as well, for like Okoye, is like there's people around her that she feels very connected to, and that gives her purpose outside of T'Challa's death.
Yeah.
I think where Okoye really loses it is when, like, she loses Shuri, and then she loses that position.
Yeah.
That's when we see Okoye break down.
Yes.
And not know what to do.
Well, when the queen is also not as elevated above this as she so thought.
Yeah.
It echoes back to that idea I'm talking about of loops being closed. But before we get into that, because that's going to tie into kind of the anger theme of this episode, that we definitely need to come up. Let's take a break here and then talk about some of the different ways that grief manifests beyond just the avoidance of sadness. Because the theme of this movie, beyond just the grief, is the anger.
Vengeance, too.
Vengeance.
Some Batman shit.
Some Batman shit.
And look at that. I didn't even have to say it.
Well, two motherfuckers who need to go to fucking therapy.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, I'm going to put on a black outfit and just beat people up.
Yeah.
And break. And now we're back from break.
Are we? I reject that notion. But the thing we need to cover in this movie, beyond just digging deep into grief, which we can obviously probably do
forever.
Forever. And I could translate everything Hannah and Brittany had said so beautifully from their theoretical orientations back into mine and say it in a different way and speak it into the language of parts through which I have found so much meaning and understanding and feel like I see it. And just because I see it and can speak it that way doesn't mean that's the right way. It's the way that made it make sense to me.
Yeah.
And you know what's so interesting? This is just a little like tidbit for all the therapists or psychology students listening, is when Ben describes it, I have to really think about how he's conceptualizing it.
Yes.
Which is why it's so whenever you hear any of us talking about something, we might not be like your orientation, like you're saying, Ben.
Right.
That there's different ways you can figure out how the human experience makes sense to you.
Right, which is why I cordially invited myself to shut the fuck up for a minute. And threw it to Hannah because I thought Hannah was on something that like we got brain squirreled away from, and like wanted to let Hannah's thought have air. Not that I'm the keeper of it, but I just wanted it to,
Ben tells us when we are allowed to speak.
That is the nature of this podcast. As the cisgendered white male, I feel like in this episode of Black Panther that I assert my dominance.
And Ben allows us to speak.
And I allow you each to speak as I am king of this motherfucking castle. And I will be deleting all of this immediately. But those of you who get the outtakes can enjoy our nonsense.
Patreon listeners.
Because none of that is our dynamic. But I wanted Hannah's point to have air because it's important that people hear it from different perspectives. And we need to let the reality of psychology be that it's 1,001 ways of saying the same thing. But finding a practitioner that speaks a language that resonates to you is where you can find healing, which takes a lot of time for the characters in this movie to do, some of them millennia.
Yeah, because I'd say another big theme I think you're getting to, Ben, is anger and vengeance in this movie. We haven't really talked about that since like Princess Bride in that way. Of like this idea that if I can avenge something, like this person I've loved who died, I will just not feel like this anymore.
Absolutely.
I'll feel great. I'll feel fine. I won't have any hard feelings ever again.
And watching what they chose to do as this film progressed, introducing Namor as the villain and him being in such a dark, vengeful place that he has been preparing since the 1500s to take vengeance on the surface world. He has been keeping his people alive. He is a full-on mythical being, a god, a demigod.
OG mutant, right?
Yeah, he does identify himself as a mutant.
Which was absolutely not Kevin Feige playing with us, as he tends to do.
Yeah.
But having him as a villain is an excellent depiction of shadow work.
Which is another orientation, Jungian.
Yes. A Jungian perspective on that is that Shuri has to go through a lot of shadow work. She not only has to deal with Namor as her primary villain, but when she finally does reactivate or recultivate, re-engineer, whatever the proper term for making the heart-shaped herb come back, that she does, when she goes to the ancestral plane, Ryan Coogler and the writing team again make a brilliant decision.
For it to be Killmonger.
For it to be Killmonger.
That was like, woo! That was
I think
like...
I gasped out loud when I saw him.
Well, also him in that sweater, girl.
Oof.
Oof. Anyway.
Damn, he looked good.
But yeah, I think, well, one, Ben, can you explain to the audience what you mean by shadow and shadow work? That's a word that kind of gets tossed around sometimes, but no one really explains what that means.
So in Jungian theory, the shadow is the dark version of yourself. It is the version of you or a reflection of you that does everything you wished you could have done if you had no morals. If you could have given in to the dark side.
I was waiting on it, waiting
Waiting for
the reference you're about
literal
to make.
best example of that ever
Just
to
say
be Darth Vader.
Oh, Anakin Skywalker. Oh.
No, we're not talking about Anakin Skywalker. We're talking about Darth Vader.
Okay.
Anakin is not the shadow.
No, Vader is.
Vader is the shadow.
That's true. You're right. That's true.
And Joker is the shadow.
That's what I thought you were going to
of
say. I was
Batman.
waiting for you to say Joker when you were saying no morals.
Yeah. Well, Joker is chaos. He's chaos. He's no morals. None.
He's a dog chasing a car. He wouldn't know what to do with it if he got it.
No, that was a lie. That was a manipulation to manipulate Two-Face. I think Joker always knows what he's doing. He just doesn't always know when or how. But looking at the shadow as a exercise, people at some point when they're in these spaces with grief and pain and loss and trauma have a choice to make that may or may not feel like a choice.
Are you going to deal or you're not going to deal?
You're going to deal or you're not going to deal, or are you going to dissociate and activate your fight part or a hateful part of yourself that is going to constantly seek to inflict the same pain you have been under and still feel upon others?
Hurt people hurt people.
Hurt people do hurt people. And Namor exists because of that. And looking at how firmly into that life Shuri gets tempted. Like she very, very nearly gives into it. And she does for some period of time. She is full on letting Wakanda join. And it's not until Nakia shows up and shines a light on that shadow that she gets shocked back out of it and realizes how dark that path is, that there is no light. People may or may not like the new Metallica album, but there's the second song on that album is called Shadows Follow. And the chorus over and over that they repeat in that song is, on I run, but still my shadows follow. In Jungian work, the acknowledgement that that dark part of us is always there. It's always there. There's always some voice in our head that is going, burn it. all of it. There's characters in movies and stories that have existed forever, like Palpatine in particular.
Don't bring him into this.
I mean,
And you've got one more Star Wars reference for this episode. Nate. You've used 2 so far. You have one more in your pocket.
I can probably
Strike
do it
3.
no, they all follow the same thing. It's all the Joseph Campbell Path of the Hero, right? It's all basically that. But
Yeah.
having your shadow talk to you is something we can only externally represent, and we do in media, and it resonates. The best villains are the most rational depictions of our shadow self that tell us what we want to hear, what the angry part wants to be unleashed. Mm-hmm. And Namor does that for her, of explaining to her and showing her that there is a world where you can thrive in your anger and your pain. You don't have to feel, you don't have to let it go. You don't have to succumb to this. You don't have to feel weak. Instead, you can feel strong and you can destroy your enemies.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked before at length about how anger is an emotion that allows us to believe in the fantasy that we have control.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it feels like a powerful feeling. And the sadness, grief, all these other feelings feel so passive.
And it feels like an action.
yeah, and anger
Being
feels like an
angry
action.
Feels like an action.
And it may become one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, violence definitely, there's action there and there's arguably power there, right?
And there's emotional release.
And catharsis, yeah. Which I think when you were talking about that, Ben, that's what I was thinking of, is that catharsis. And that's sometimes what I'll validate for clients too. I go, yeah, it can feel good in the moment to be self-destructive is sometimes how I'll put it. You know, to act on those desires, those impulses, right? Mm-hmm. It can feel good in the moment, and it becomes, you have to really struggle with yourself about long-term quality of life over short-term catharsis. Mm-hmm. And that you are paying a price by giving in to these more in the moment, shadow fueled, if you will, behaviors.
The dark side?
Yeah.
Sure.
You just didn't want to say
You're
it.
going to
It
fall
was-
into a lava pit and lose all your limbs and your ability to breathe appropriately. And you're going to have to wear like that stupid suit the rest of your life, like that fucking dork Darth Vader.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
And I'd be like, yeah, and? Darth Vader should have matched wits with a teenage girl. Anyway.
But
yeah.
The importance of acknowledging the shadow self and why it resonates in media and why Jung studied it is because it's a voice we hear inside ourselves all the time. It's an impulse we have to deal with. There is constantly a discussion, a boardroom meeting. I often remind clients, you are the president and you are sitting in your war room beneath the White House, and all of your cabinet members are there talking to you. And there is going to be at some point where your Secretary of State or your attached part is saying, we have to use diplomacy. We have to understand their world. We have to understand where they're coming from. And your Secretary of Defense is sitting there in a military uniform with his arms crossed or her arms crossed or their arms crossed. However they present for you, however you present, it's all okay. Sits
My
there.
inclusive king, Ben, go ahead.
God, I hate you so much. And I'm revoking your right to speak.
Ah, damn it.
But it's sitting there with its arm crossed, looking and going like, I don't know why we're talking about peace negotiations. We could just firebomb them. Mm-hmm. And they won't be a problem anymore.
Fist to the table. Why are we even joking about this? This is like nukes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the problem is, those are only reflections. They are components of your personality, and they exist to complete a function, and then they retreat back. So, sticking with the firebombing metaphor, the Secretary of Defense has no problem making the call to the pilot to fly a bomb or fly a plane over, drop a bunch of bombs, and then that plane's going to fly, land back in its hangar, and like, all's good. Mm-hmm. The person that flew that plane won't be on the ground, won't be surveying the damage, won't be seeing what they did, and won't give a shit because they did what they were supposed to do, and they're going home.
Yeah, but you are still going to be there, the you in your life,
Right.
and you're going to be in the middle of it when you drop whatever bomb you want to drop.
Right. You will not be able to stay in that dissociated state where you don't feel that and you just activate your fight part to go out and do it. But when people are grieving, they don't always know how to see that. And because these feelings are so intense and there's nowhere to go with it, they get stuck and they seek some way to let these open loops have a way out, to speak, to try to close so that they can deactivate, because otherwise some part stays activated forever. And that avoidance is what Hannah was talking about earlier. And we see that Namor refuses to acknowledge that humanity may have changed. He sees it through the lens he wants to. He is stuck replaying from the mindset of a small child, watching his people be tortured and burned, watching his mother die.
Yeah. Well, I wrote in my notes like the trauma of colonialization.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and how that can't not forever alter your perception of the world, of the outside world, of people with maybe different skin color than you, like in this situation, the Spanish, right? The Europeans. And how he does something that people do, which is then they make a big decision and isolate. Like he's taken his people underwater, like forever detached from the rest of the world, the surface, as he says. And so, yeah, you're right, Ben, in that because of that, it continues a narrative for him that people are not to be trusted. Surface people are evil, uniformly evil.
Yeah.
They will hurt you. They won't try to understand you. They'll write you off as a child as being demonic. They won't even consider why you felt the way you were feeling towards them or acted the way that you acted. Like I was even thinking like he's so little and to be so powerful, like that would be a trip, period.
Yeah.
And like, how do you make sense of having that much power? Not even just like the literal mutant power, but also like people listening to you like a god from that age, right?
Yeah.
And so nothing then ever challenges your viewpoint of the world. And then in this situation, because he's immortal and it's been like generations and generations of his people, no one will think to challenge. It's like a feedback loop, you know, of like mythology and about the world, the surface world, and massive distrust. Understandable so. I mean, I think that's like when I know I wasn't, because I was moving, I wasn't a part of our episode on the first Black Panther. So I apologize if I repeat stuff that was said in that episode. But I think that was what's so interesting about Killmonger again. And I think why it was interesting that he showed up again in this movie is that very understandable idea of that distrust of like people really were split on Killmonger, like thinking that he had the right idea in the first movie in terms of how to handle things and how to deal with like the oppressive people, white people, right?
Who are coming.
Yeah. And so I think when you work with someone like Namor, I don't think you would ever come to a therapist's office. You know, that also requires that acknowledgement of like, it makes sense why you feel this way and why you believe that. And what you're doing is an act of love to your people, being that protective, being that isolated, being that insular, like, and it's so myopic, which is what you're saying, Ben. Like it's so one viewpoint. Killmonger's like that too. One viewpoint only. And that is letting Shuri's shadow self thrive.
The writing on this is so brilliant, right? It ties all of that in. There's multiple layers of grief happening that are activating her threat.
Absolutely.
They encounter Namor, who is a threat, but he doesn't necessarily want to be a threat. He wants to ally with them, but they are two leaders of hidden kingdoms seeking to protect their own things. But Namor still has his power, and Shuri's kingdom does not.
And her kingdom has made the decision to open themselves up to the world And Namor is still in the hardcore belief that that is the bad decision to make.
But then the French had a moment where they did something in the United Nations scene that they weren't supposed to do, and they had sent, or the UN sent commandos, whoever it was, and tried to keep it secret and violated the treaty.
They had to backdoor it with some mercenaries.
Right. And I think it was the French that they, but I'm not sure.
I feel like they were speaking French, so I think you're onto something.
I
They
think-
were definitely
I think it was
speaking
the French.
I don't know if it was the country
Yeah,
of France
yeah.
that did
I think it was the country of France.
but
Yeah, I
it
think
was,
it
they
was.
were all speaking French.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they tried to backdoor it and were proving the threat is real. The threat her people have contended with for generations while they hid behind their force field.
Which is why, like, when I do work with people, I think in order to do this work, you have to also be somewhat aware of systems of oppression, like to validate clients, right?
Yeah,
Like, kind of
absolutely.
what you're saying, Ben, is like, sometimes when these things come up, you have to validate that for clients too, especially clients you work with who aren't part of like the majority, you know, is that there's legit reasons why their fears, their angers, their protective stances are valid.
They are, and watching Shuri have to deal with hearing Namor's point of view and showing her just how safe and thriving
Yeah.
he's been able to keep his people. The entire political discussion they're going through about Wakanda and bringing it into the light of the world threatens that safety and does so without the Black Panther, which has been a big failure to her. And she's trying to contend with all of that simultaneously, and then having Killmonger's voice be the one when she does get the power back.
Yeah, scary.
It's scary because his was, they're real, they're coming for you, and it was the same voice echoing the shadow voice, which makes the fact that Shuri had a brief heel turn before she turned back face all the more heroic.
And I think what's so interesting about that part of it is that that's confrontational for Shuri in several ways, right? Like,
Yes.
as like the turn in the movie is one, her having to really acknowledge that there is an afterlife, like the spiritual aspect of it that she's been trying to reject in favor of technology and modernity and like the things that she understands, and also to be confronted with, of everyone she could see that has passed on that she loves, she sees this guy, this motherfucker, who had created the problem she's trying to solve, like the heart herb, you know, heart-shaped herb and all this stuff. And that, it makes sense why when she comes back in to the real world,
Yeah.
she lies.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that Nakia calls her on it several times. I think Nakia is such a good grounding character, such an emotionally intelligent, grounded character.
Yeah.
Someone who clearly has processed her grief well. And so I think what I like about Nakia with that is that she challenges Shuri once. She's like, who did you see? She does not get combative with Shuri when she says nobody. I didn't see anything. Even though it clearly worked because she punches that dummy, the mannequin, like into the wall. And then later she says again, what did you see? You know, Nakia does a great job of, which is kind of like a therapist-y kind of job, which is, I'm not pushing you, but I'm challenging you a little bit, but I'm not trying to push you past your point of tolerance, but I'm also not enabling you. You know, and that there is something there. And she's trying to get her to acknowledge it. Because something I tell clients too is like, you're not having emotions because you're not dealing with it. You are having a hard time. You're not having a hard time. And that, like you're kind of saying with the anticipation part, this is the idea that like, I will go into it, the emotions, I will open the door, I will fall in the pit, whatever, and that I will then be suffering. And sometimes I'll say to clients, if I have good enough rapport, babe, you're already suffering. Like,
go right
you
for it.
are already suffering.
Yeah.
And
It needs to be said.
I think
Yeah.
Nakia is kind of trying to do that with her, which, what are we doing?
I think so too.
You're already having a hard time. This isn't you're not bullshitting me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You're not bullshitting anybody.
You're bullshitting yourself.
Yes.
I mean, as a therapist, we need to be mindful of what level of rapport we have. Like, you can't say it to the client that's not there, but like when it's things like that are that blatantly obvious, I think it's our role, and I coach, like the people that I train, like those are the moments where you have to recognize you're their therapist and not their friend. You're their therapist and not their family, and they are employing you to help guide them to the answers that they need, and those aren't always the fun ones. You don't need to be an asshole, and you shouldn't be, but sometimes you need to say what needs to be said, which can be, you are in pain.
And like, I'm looking at you right now. I'm looking at you right now, and you look miserable.
Yeah.
You know?
You need to crack the film of bullshit, that bubble of nonsense that people construct around themselves when they're stuck in those places that they can just do it. They can do it their way. They can be okay. They can find the solution. They can do it the right way. They just need to try harder this time. And it's our job to be like, do exactly what the queen did and say no. And then later Nakia.
And I think what makes it feel, because it's a really quick turn, like she's full vengeance, anger.
Yes.
And then at the last minute, she gives Namor the opportunity to yield, right? Like, we can pull this together, which is really quick. I think I can kind of argue that why I can believe that versus like a Killmonger and a Namor who can't get there. You know, and as we see in like the kind of epilogue of the movie, Namor was kind of bullshitting.
Yeah.
He's like, no, this is part of my, like, he's lived centuries. Like, this is just a blip in his long-term plan, right? And is that Shuri, I think what also says why she probably would be diagnosed with something if she came to some, like one of our offices, maybe PTSD, something like that, is that this is a different presentation of her. As we've seen in these other movies with her, she's bubbly, she's jokey, she's optimistic, she's very like hopeful and silly and young and vibrant. And so, and giving, like she's very generous. She helps the colonizer, as they keep calling Martin Freeman's character.
Yes.
Like Vision, like she's very open person and very loving. And so I think why she's capable of making that turn, which I could see people saying like that happened so quickly, is I think that is who she really is. The yielding. And all this anger and vengeance is her, you kind of say, Ben, like her, that part of her that's coming in and kind of taking the front seat during this time when she's not dealing. So I think even though that happens quick, I can believe that because this version of her in this movie is such a different presentation of her.
Yes.
Than everything we've seen so far, which I think is important to point out if you're thinking of her from like a clinical standpoint, is that she is characteristically different.
Yeah.
Whereas Namor has been like this for a long time. Killmonger has been that way for a long time. You know, that's still their own stuff. Like, I'm not trying to say like that's just their personality. Like, that's still their stuff.
Yeah.
But Shuri has only been like this for a year.
Yeah. And seeing her turn in and out of it so quickly versus those two can is a fantastic point. Because Shuri has operated from a world where she has had everything.
Your privilege, safety, security, intelligence.
Shuri has not lived in a world where she has experienced a long history of loss and abuse and intrusions under her territory. She has lived in a world where they literally had a shield and technology that is so far advanced that if any other civilization even attempted to enter their world, it would go poorly. And she designed the technology that would make it go poorly.
Yeah.
So the position of safety she'd operated from her whole life, it makes sense that she would be able to find herself again quicker than these other characters, and yet she's no match for Namor. She's no match in him fawning, which is your submit, your appease part of yourself that you have to find in order to submit when you are defeated. Mm-hmm. But it's only there when the threat's there.
Yeah.
So long as the threat's active, he could fawn to her and show the submission and make an alliance. But once Namora enters the picture, he's deceiving somebody. Mm-hmm. Of course, because Marvel in their brilliance, they're not going to tell us who and leave it as a narrative path for him to follow, to confront his own shadow. Mm-hmm. We see this conflict resolve for her that I'm not going to be that. Mm-hmm. Once she gets on the precipice of it, which is that gift that you can give someone in a story that real people don't always get. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Real people don't always get the chance to turn things around on a dime, and where people can have that reaction you're talking about of like, wow, that's really fast, because they've been in similar places themselves, maybe not as fantastical, but they've been in similar places themselves and made the wrong choice. Mm-hmm. That activates a regret from them going like, nah, you don't get out of that fast. You're going to blow up your life. Then you're going to feel real sad about it and salty and angry and guilty. And then you're going to crawl back on your knees through that shame, guilt, and find your path to forgiveness before you get there. That shit ain't going to happen lickety split in the moment. But that's not entirely true either. It can go infinite ways.
And also what I think will be powerful for Shuri is that, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with like Namor, like long term in terms of the Marvel universe. Yeah. But what'll be powerful for her is she is rewarded for making this decision, for choosing a path that's more connected to her authentic self, right? In that it ends the war, he yields, there's peace. Everyone seems to be okay with this decision she made. M'Baku very like peacefully is like, I seems to be like ruling as a regent for her so that she can go get the space she needs. Like no one's mad at her for taking this approach and not like dominating Namor. Yeah. So I think what is really healing for Shuri is that there isn't any defiance or consequences for her that she knows about, right? Yeah. In the short term. And that's powerful too, because I think also with clients, there's that anxiety of if I go this way, if I don't feed into my shadow self, right? In that protective way, then there'll be consequences for that I can't abide. And sometimes when I talk to people, I'm like, there might be, you know? Everything has consequences too. Like these consequences that you can live with. And I think with Shuri, like she can't live with the consequence of being a murderer like that. Yeah.
She can't. And I'm glad you brought up M'Baku, because he is someone who is also doing a little bit of a reflection journey. He is doing the opposite. He is living in his light self. But
I love him.
M'Baku is a great character, but he has shown himself to be a little roguish and also withdrawn, but he's ambitious and eager and wants the throne and wants things to be done the way of the gorilla. And then he's getting his validation. He's getting an opportunity to reflect and live on his light side. But don't forget, he challenges for the throne while she's away in Haiti.
Yeah, but I feel like that was a deal he made with her.
Yeah, I feel like he is ruling in her stead while she goes and takes care of herself.
Yeah, because he did say like, I'm here for you. Like, I'm here to give you counsel. That was your brother's like deathbed wish to me. Yeah. You know, I think I always viewed him coming off of the plane at the end as him being like kind of a joke. Like, you know how I am, here to call like, but really it was him, I think, saying like, hey, I chit-chatted with Shuri. This is kind of like what we're doing for right now, which probably does satisfy the part of him that wants to be more in charge. People do love being regents for that reason in the stories I've read.
Yes.
And I guess I want to trust, because I love him, that when she's ready to step into it, he might be like her first lieutenant. You know what I mean? Like her buddy, her hand of the king, if you will.
Yes.
Well, I don't think that's just gonna happen that way.
Why?
It's not gonna be that easy. I think
I feel like in a different story they would get married and be king and queen.
that may still happen, but I don't think it's gonna be that easy, because I think much like we're seeing this writer show people have to deal with the multiple parts of ourselves and the multiple ways they present when different feelings and different circumstances become active. For different characters, yes, everybody is dealing with the grief and the loss of T'Challa and what he meant to the society, etc. And we see that, but that dynamic also plays out with M'Baku's people and his values and of the lowland groups. And it's pure speculation. Maybe it will come out that he will kind of see this and realize, I'll give it back to you.
I feel like he's taking like a surrogate big brother role with her.
Yeah.
I think
so
it
do
would
I.
be really awful. Like from an interpersonal perspective, if he damaged that with her.
Yeah.
But
Could he do that? Sure. Like, I'm not
could.
saying that story wise that couldn't happen.
Yeah.
What I'm saying right now is I really hope that doesn't happen,
Yeah.
because I think his character has come a long way, characterization wise, and it seems like he wants to be to Shuri in like a real authentic familial way, especially given all that Shuri's been through. When he says that line of like, I'm not going to treat you like a child, you've been through too much. I don't know. I feel like I felt there was respect there.
Once he gets the chance to live in that idealized self, he may not let go of it so easily, even if he likely ultimately will. It's possible that it will be difficult for the roguishness of him to let go of what he's always wanted. And as we know with human beings, they do not always make the right choice.
Sure.
And that can, despite their best intentions or what the purest part of them felt, that's not always the part that gets to be in charge. And for M'Baku and that happening at the end of the film, it is an interesting journey watching him struggle with who he wants to be, because his values are decidedly different. And his alliance has always been to his people first. And I'm curious to see where that will go.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll take a break here and then we'll go back for treatment. So we've kind of talked about treatment here and there throughout this episode. I don't know if there's anything any three of us would like to add, or if there's any specific person in this movie that we would like to focus on, because I feel like Shuri is the person, and we've kind of really talked about what we'd want to do with her and like how to approach a client in grief like her. But do any of us have anything we'd like to elaborate on more specifically, or maybe even another character entirely that you would like to work with?
And we get to see Shuri go on her journey, but I think what I want to concretize is about not necessarily maybe a character-specific treatment of grief, but painting with a broader brush to concretize some of these ideas that we've talked about. Dealing with grief and loss is my everyday. I know it's many therapists every day, but doing what I do in particular, dealing with traumatic loss and long-term loss, and these things are what I deal with in and out every day. And I really dedicated a lot of time over the past couple of years learning what I feel our profession doesn't do an adequate job of providing graduate students an education in, which is learning to understand just how deep, just how profound, and just how difficult healing from grief is, and where a therapist's head needs to be at, and how much you need to be able to see simultaneously so that you're not buying in to the story the client wants you to believe more than you're seeing what's going on with them. And that's always the role of the therapist, right? Like, we need to see what's going on, not just the story I'm being told. But understanding the journey of grief is about communicating to people more than anything. There is no way back. There is no return to the life you had, the person you were. I just want to feel like I did then. It will never, ever again be the same, because nothing is the same. And communicating that is a hard message, because you want to provide comfort and you want to help people see that, no, you'll be okay. You can still be you and you can still do things. No, that's not helpful. You're creating yet another suspended animation that protects them, like Magneto's bubble that he uses to fly, protects him from anything penetrating. The reality of grief to work is that the bubble must be popped. The reality you are protecting yourself from is the one you need to feel the most. Every single thing you felt about the person or situation or culture or identity that you lost became relevant to you because it made you feel. And now you have to feel every bit of that change. Every one of those definitions you had a feeling to create a definition for, you must have a feeling now to redefine it and find yourself in this new world, post-loss. And watching Shuri go on this journey where person after person in her life who has gone on that journey in a different way or is going on that journey simultaneously in the case of Okoye. Okoye is having her meaning stripped from her, and they're kind of telling parallel stories at the same time too. But it is so vital when you are with grief that you are teaching people you can face the darkness. You can deal with this. Reinforcing messages that they cannot, that they just need to keep going, that they just need to keep going to work, that they need to keep doing all these other things, is not where healing lies. Healing lies in helping them learn to embrace the pain, surrender to the emotions, and get back into their body instead of in 1,000 realities where they are perceiving more danger than is there while also avoiding the pain that's very real, that they must feel. Their body will not yield that pain ever until you feel it. And even then, it won't be gone. Grief comes in waves. Every time you have a new realization, a new feeling, something that would have been relevant to that person, a song you hear, a movie you think, a thought of them, every time that feeling or thought comes up, you have to process it now from that's something we loved together to that's something they would have loved, which yet again makes you feel the loss. But if you don't go through that journey where you feel those hurts, you open yourself to feeling that sadness, you stay stuck and create a narrative that you are not ever going to heal. And that's just regular loss. When you look at things like traumatic loss, like Shuri's had, where there's something blocking it, you have to resolve the guilt and the belief that they don't deserve to heal because they did something wrong. And that becomes the work, because if you can't defeat the shame barrier that keeps people from feeling and being able to feel, because the feeling itself represents a loss of identity and they can't tolerate any more loss, but the identity that they had with that person in their life must be lost because the loss already happened. The importance of acknowledging that reality, that pain, the unavoidableness of it, the existentialness of it, and also that you are not alone in it. It is bigger than you. It is part of humanity. Suffering is inextricable from our experience. Trying is futile. To communicate those with kindness is what grief treatment is all about.
So to add more, piggyback on that, so what I'm putting in the concepts that I recognize in the way that I do therapy is like radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is a big part, I think, of that kind of grief too. Like you're saying, Ben, like reframing what is within and without your control. Sometimes I'll have clients draw a circle, and we'll say like what's out of your control is on the outside of that circle. What's in is in your control, is in the inside, which is usually just you and your choices and your coping skills and your limits and your boundaries. And really leaning into the fact that you can't change what's already happened. You can't change the past. You can't see the future. Also, I think a lot of people will be like, feel your feelings. What does that even mean? So what I've been learning more about is like somatic exercises and giving those to clients. I think that can be really helpful with if you're really trying to sit in your feelings and like a client will be like, I don't even know where my feelings are. I don't even know what do you mean? Like, if you find good, like practical somatic exercises, you can just Google somatic exercises. They have questions. It'll be like, where do you feel you're feeling in your body? Can you find that? What color could it be? Does it have a sensation? Does it have a weight? And I think it can really help people guide them through the process of like trying to feel their feelings and tolerate the sensations of feeling their feelings. And that's sometimes I'll do that with clients. Sometimes I'll have them do it as homework and then bring it in, talk about it next session. And I'll always tell them like, if it feels too overwhelming, you can pull yourself out of it. We're just trying a little at a time. And grounding exercises go with that too. If you're feeling really overwhelmed, trying those things. And so those are more like practical applications of like the grieving process. I'll sometimes give clients, and like I said, we can start in my office doing those. So with Shuri, like the whole process of like going out to like Haiti, what she's kind of doing there, to me feels like kind of what her mom's implying is like somatic exercises. Like feel it in your body, feel it in the world. Like sometimes somatic exercises are like, can you feel the sensation of the air around you? Does it have a weight? Does it have a smell? And that's kind of what Ramonda is saying to Shuri in that earlier scene, right? So I think if for anyone who's listening and they get annoyed with the feeling your feelings is like a vague command, that's a more directive way to do it that feels like you know what you're doing, like you know what that actually means. So that's like all I want to add to what you were sharing, Ben.
Yeah, it's important like that. Like I was saying with how EMDR work particularly stratifies the targeting of all these things is the physical feeling is vital to the healing. You cannot, your brain and your body are not separate things.
There ain't no healing without physical feeling, baby. You should put that on a shirt.
There you go. I'm going to phrase it exactly like that. And everyone who's been listening to the show and hearing my voice and my diction and the way I hear things, I want you to laugh every time you hear my voice saying it that way, because I'd probably literally never say that. And if I did, it would just sound so bad. But it's a critical point. And it's a critical point of healing from these kinds of losses is, I know I've said it before, one of my colleagues, as we were trying to explain to one of our other colleagues who was trained differently than us and was very big on CBT and explaining like the CBT, and we're all going, CBT is wonderful in hindsight, but for the traumatized person, it is among my least favorite things because it ignores that.
Fucking garbage. Fucking CBT.
It's fantastic for creating hindsight, right? Like an insight.
Yeah, it can help create insight in some ways, but I haven't found it particularly helpful with in any setting.
And that's what Hannah has to say about
just
that.
Just the truth.
No, like, it's fine. Right? It's
just,
true sometimes.
Yeah, just what my experience has been like. Yeah, I think, I agree with what both of you are saying, and I feel like working with Shuri, I would really want to help her create rituals for herself because that's such a big part of her culture.
Leaning into her culture more.
Leaning into seeking out people who have had multiple losses in her community, talking to those people. Like, I think that I would want to really help her create her own way to grieve these major losses that she's experienced. And also because it'll be really important to help her because she's had so much loss in such a short amount of time, really allowing her to grieve each one of them and not just grieve them together as a whole in some kind of way, of like really grieving her mother and grieving the relationship that she had with her and grieving the loss of that guidance that she doesn't have anymore.
When her father, her mother,
Her father,
and
her
her
mother, and
brother.
her brother. Like I still can't believe they killed Ramonda in this fucking episode, in this movie. It still blows my mind every time.
They had to.
I know. I know, but I don't.
It hurt too much.
It hurts
It
way
hurt
too much. My stomach hurt when she died in the fucking movie theater.
I was like, wow.
But anyway,
It's the Disney way.
So yeah. So I think that's the only thing I really wanted to add
Okay.
about what I would want to focus on with her.
Yeah, that getting past the floating headness, right? Shuri is like the complete definition of a floating head.
Yeah.
And you talking about feeling it in your stomach, like that triggers something for me. Like I wanted to like complete that point that I got distracted from, but that we had that discussion about CBT was like those of us who are trained in more somatic, that clinician is trained in art therapy and somatic experiencing and EMDR and like operates on a similar wavelength to where I do of like we need to get the feelings that are stuck in the body out in the way that they are stuck. What CBT misses is that you cannot rationalize with these things. It does not work. Yes, you can adopt new behaviors and new feelings and new things to do that can produce change. Yes, I understand. But what the point misses is that you have to recognize that when the body is physiologically activated, it operates differently than when it is calm. And when you are discussing pain and grief, there is a massive amount of pain that is unaccessed, unrealized, and unreleased that needs to be felt. And therapies that focus on getting that out, making it safe, that all the distractions stop, going out into the bush or doing something else that helps you get grounded, that gets you isolated from things, not dissociated, but grounded, so that your body will do what it is supposed to do and feel. All of our transformational experiences come from having huge abdominal contractions and reactions like you feel in the pit of our stomach. Think about all of the things that come with it. The big belly laughs. The true laugh that breaks your depression is a huge belly laugh. Orgasm. A huge athletic accomplishment comes at the point where you're at the point of exhaustion that you are heaving and gasping for air and find the strength in you to dig through and finish that race or push the opponent off of you or whatever it is. Throw the little metal ball in my case, right? Like whatever it is that you do. All of our transformational experiences come from that. And if we are blocking our body from feeling that and engaging our nervous system to give the feedback through our whole body, our brain is part of our nervous system. It's connected. Yes, mind brain we can debate all day, but brain body is not a debate. And the mind is in the brain, which is in the body. So fuck off Voltaire. And fuck off CBT in that case. We have to recognize creating a pathway that people can feel not just the emotions, but the physical release and pain that must be felt with grief, and that we don't teach them or reinforce through positive or negative reinforcement the pathways clients take to invest themselves in their work before they've done the grieving as a matter of avoidance. What you do because of the grieving is a different story, and there's a really great book on that called Man's Search for Meaning. But you can't achieve the meaning from the loss without first feeling the loss.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll take one last break there and then come back with final thoughts. All right. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
So I love this movie. I think it was really well done. I really enjoyed it. I've watched it many times, even though it's so sad.
That doesn't stop you.
It doesn't stop me. But with some of the
Perhaps you
things,
seek it
I
out.
really love the way that they honored Chadwick Boseman. I also really enjoyed some of the things that are the same from some of the other movies that the Black Panther is in. So in Civil War, we watch T'Challa come to the same realization that vengeance doesn't work. He comes to that same conclusion himself when he realizes all of these other people, Iron Man and Captain America and Bucky, are all trying to it's all because they're angry and upset and they're trying to do something. And T'Challa comes to that same realization that vengeance is not the way. And I thought it was really beautiful that Shuri comes to has that same journey. The other thing that I think was interesting, the other thing that I thought was interesting about the film is that they also killed Queen Ramonda in a very similar way that her husband, King T'Chaka, was killed. Where
true.
there's a glass window, there's an explosion, and then the chaos and then the death of her. So I thought it was really interesting that there were some parallels from some of the other films. But it's really beautifully acted. It just tells such a beautiful story and leans into grief in a way that I wish our society could. In terms of the way that they dealt with Chadwick Boseman. And the way that they handled that. So I love this movie. I'll definitely watch it again. And I'm excited to see what we're going to get after this.
I can go next. I also love this movie. I think it's one of the best Marvel movies, period, of the ones that have come out so far.
Agreed.
In terms of what we were talking about so far, it had like a impossible task.
Yes.
Which was to restructure a story where the main actor has passed that is so beloved like intimately by the cast. Like that's their friend and the director, right? And so the director's friend. And so I think it did such a beautiful job not mishandling that. It seemed like, and what I hope that like Kevin Feige gave them permission, like gave them space to do, is kind of let them write it however they felt like they had to write it.
Yeah.
To not make a meal out of Chadwick Boseman's death, not do any like sympathy, like gross exploitative stuff with his passing, right? It seemed like they really let the audience have whatever they needed to have with those spaces of silence we talked about, which you don't really have in movies like that. Like no noise, no like score coming up that's supposed to make us cry, like something very like, ugh. And so, I think this movie couldn't have been done better in terms of handling the horrible circumstances in which it was made.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested where the story will go. I'm really interested where Shuri's story will go.
Yeah.
Like if she will become queen, really. Kind of leaves it open-ended, which is interesting. If it's going to just maybe pass even to T'Challa's son, the new T'Challa, right? It'll be interesting to see where it goes. I think it could go in a lot of directions. But I really love it. I think it's beautiful. I love the soundtrack. The soundtrack is beautiful.
Yeah.
Ludwig Göransson's really putting his foot in all these soundtracks lately. Good for him. I really am glad to see that it got handled well and beautifully, and I look forward to the continuation of the story.
I guess that leaves me, and I full agree. This is, if not the best, it's the second best of the Marvel movies. It's absolutely accomplishing an impossible task, but it's all doing it in such a grounded, real way and a challenging way that it truly did the impossible and allowed us all to grieve, to feel the conflict, the mistrust, the doubt, and then the hope.
It ended very beautifully.
I cry every time. No matter how many times I've seen the movie, I cry at that last scene.
The things it did right that echo some of these tirades and speeches that, I tend to go on sometimes, as you may have noticed. But you're still listening, so thank you. But what I love about this is that it managed to do a couple things without repeating narratives that make me as a therapist scream in my mind. The thing people who are going through loss want more than anything else is what they can't have. And this movie did not give that to us, and it did not give that to Shuri. Shuri tells us many times she wants nothing more than to see her brother again. And when she finally closes the loop on creating that herb and possibly having a healing experience, expecting to see her father, to see T'Challa,
Her mom,
she sees Killmonger. And much like life, we do not get what we want when it is not possible to get. And we must reckon with that. We must face it. We must deal with the sadness that comes from that and grow beyond it and find a place for that hurt while opening ourselves up to what we needed to take from that. And that's what this story did. Every chance they had to tell a story in fantasy, they declined. And they told a story in reality in a fantasy world. And I love that they did that. And it is difficult. It is hard, and it is big feelings, and it's going to make people who have gone through losses deal with big feelings or have an avenue to have a cathartic experience they may need but may not be ready for. I can see this movie being really challenging for people who've had loss, but it's also really powerful in that it closes all its own loops by going, we cannot operate in a world where we construct control over that which cannot be controlled. But instead, we have to operate in a world where these fucking dogs are running through my motherfucking house when I'm trying to make my final point, and I'm gonna take a breath before I lose my ever-loving shit. What this movie did was it found a way to close all the loops that people are feeling, that it helps us confront the narrative that we have no control over death, we have no control over life, and we have no control over what happens. All we can control is what we do with the time that's been given to us and what choices we make next. And just because we've made the wrong choice or the painful choice or a regrettable choice time and time again doesn't mean we have to continue doing so. And seeing Shuri realize that that's the gift that she has, that she can lean on who she has been, who she wants to be, and work towards creating a world she wants to see, but not one that she has to be reactive to all of the hurts of the past in order to create the world she wants to see, I think is the most beautiful story that Marvel has ever taken on, and I really look forward to seeing what they do next.
All right, so thank you all for listening. As always, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology, Twitter or X, at popcorn_psych.
Or don't find us there,
just
let it burn.
Yeah. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com if you have any messages you want to send us, requests for movies, anything like that. And always, if you can find us wherever you listen and rate and review us, it's the best way for new people to find us. And like we've said before, we have a Patreon if you would love to support us through that, or a TeePublic account if you would like some merch with our logo on it. So, everybody out there have, I don't know. Thank you for listening.
You could have just said Wakanda Forever.
Wakanda Forever.